Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon, and today's show is special, and it's something that we need to do. This is a tribute to our beloved state senator, Ken Donnelly, who passed away recently. Ken Donnelly began his career as a firefighter in Lexington, and soon after joining the department, decided that he wanted to have a role in sticking up for his coworkers. He joined the union and soon became the legislative liaison for the professional firefighters of Massachusetts. When he retired from firefighting, he ran for the Senate, eventually winning the 4th Middlesex District, which includes Burlington. He's been our senator for 9 years. So let's turn it over to our first panel, visitors from Beacon Hill. Thank you. Representative Jay Kaufman, who lives in Lexington, and Representative Jim Dwyer, who lives in Woburn. Thank you very much for joining me for this conversation about Senator Donnelly. You both worked with Senator Donnelly through his career in the Senate. Let's talk about some of the impressions that you have of what it was like to work with Senator Donnelly.
Well,
go ahead, Jim.
I'm going to start because actually I know Senator Donnelly well before he became senator. His brother Al was a very dear friend of mine who was a great public servant in the city of Woburn. Al Donnelly. He was a police officer in the city of Woburn. Very connected with the youth and the court system itself. And Al was just a great guy and cut out of the same cloth as Ken Donnelly and his brothers and his family. I met Ken through his brother Al before Kenny got elected. So Ken and I were kind of friends together before we were colleagues, so to speak. And as Jay, I'm sure Jay's going to say, I always admired Kenny, not only because of his 37 years in public service. Right. I mean, think about that. It's 37 years of him dedicating his life and good deeds to Lexington as a firefighter, PFFM as a legislative aide, so to speak, with them, advancing. I mean, I think Jay could probably say the same thing. I don't think there's one bill that's been passed to enhance the lives of firefighters and their families that didn't have Kenny's fingerprints on them.
That's right.
For years and years and years. So I consider Kenny not only a colleague but a very dear friend.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen to all that. Ken was, I guess the first word that comes to mind is just unbelievably kind. He was just a real, in my tradition we call him a mensch. He was a very loving, caring person, and despite the fact that we think of him first sort of as a colleague in the State House, I think we probably should think of him first as a husband and father and grandfather, and really dedicated to not only his immediate family but people around him in general. Like Jim, I first met him before he was in the State House. He was vice president and sort of the #1 legislative aide for the professional firefighters of Massachusetts. And I remember distinctly the years that I chaired the Public Service Committee that had jurisdiction over public servants like firefighters. Ken would come into my office with some of the other firefighters, and I'd get the whole rap about what was really important. They would leave, and then 10 minutes later, Ken would come into my office and say, here's the 10% of what you just heard that you really should pay attention to. So he had a sense of perspective and a sense of a political wisdom that was just innate. I mean, it's not like something that somebody taught him or that he learned at a program on how to be an effective legislator or an effective legislative agent. He just knew it. He just knew people.
You're right.
And cared deeply.
You know, you mentioned his devotion to his family. Yeah. The day that I met him was in Burlington at the town center at the Common, and it was on truck day. And we were walking through truck day, and he had his grandchildren with him. Yeah. And he was keeping an eye on them, but he was introducing me. I was running for office for the first time, and I didn't know many folks, but he was important to him that he reached out and he introduced me to so many people that he knew. And what impressed me was how easy it was for people to come up to him and say, Senator Donnelly, and he made people feel comfortable with him. It was that kindness.
Well, Ken he exuded that. He was just a normal, typical guy. And as Jay had mentioned about his family, and when I first got elected state representative, it was just shortly after, because Ken had just lost the Senate race, and And then he got elected just shortly after that. My wife and Judy became pretty good friends. And the funny part about that is my wife and Judy don't particularly care for politics. So she would occasionally call my wife and say, are you going to the Woburn Boys Club time? Are you going to this time in Woburn? Are you going? And they used to coordinate their schedules a little bit to coordinate. So Judy and my wife would get together and shoot the breeze while Ken and I were kind of doing our thing, so to speak. So he loved the city of Woburn. There wasn't, I don't think I can remember in all those years that he was a state senator, that he didn't come to, like, we have Veterans Week this week.
Right.
You know, not just Veterans Day in Woburn, but Veterans Week. And Jay's been great about that. But Ken was the same way. Ken would come to the senior kickoff to honor our senior veterans. He would go to the Moose Breakfast. He would always attend our Veterans Day ceremonies in downtown Woburn, always. He never missed anything in Woburn. And he had a pretty good connection to Woburn. And as a result of that, the people in Woburn had a pretty good connection to Ken.
It's great.
They knew Ken cared.
Yeah.
And he did care.
Yeah.
There was no phony, baloney stuff about Ken Donnelly. He was just a man. He just exuded kindness and courtesy. And I always remember, I don't think I ever saw Kenny coming down towards me. He didn't have a huge smile on his face, you know, and that was Ken.
Right.
You know, the other thing to mention in the same vein is that kind of personal touch is incredibly important in the game that we're all in the political arena, because so much of it is built on relationships. I mean, we debate ideas, but the truth of the matter is a lot of what goes on between us and that produces results is because of our personal relationship. And I don't think there was a soul in the State House that didn't love Ken Donnelly. That holds true for his colleagues, holds true for his staff, holds true for the staffs of other colleagues. He was a real guy.
Yep.
Well, Ken used to say too, and Ken would often tell, and I think he'd often say that he was very, very fortunate because he was friends with all his district representation.
And it's true.
And Ken, yeah, and you say that too. And Ken used to surprise me at times. You'd say it's not like that all across the state, where the senator got along tremendously with all the state representatives. And I think the main reason for that is Ken made it easy. Ken made it easy for all of us to get along and kind of do the people's work, so to speak.
Right.
Outside of party ideology, he transcended that.
Right. We're going to have our Republican colleague, Mark Lombardo, is going to visit with us a little bit later in the show. But, you know, we didn't always have to agree with every position.
Exactly.
In fact, sometimes he would talk to us about, well, I understand your position, but it wasn't personal. We would still work together on the next issue, and he was effective. One of the first things I learned about Ken, learned from Ken, was, you know, he held, as you say, from the community, he held office hours every month in the COA in Burlington. Marge McDonald will come join us later, but he was committed to spending time with people in the community. And, you know, it was as if someone from the community said, gee, if I was ever elected as a representative or as a senator, what would I do? And one of the first things I'd do is I'd be accessible. I would want to hear from people and be there. And so following in those footsteps, every month, you know, I have done that. People said, well why? I said, because Ken Donnelly would have done that.
Right, exactly.
Is doing that at the time,
and he did it not because he thought it was the right thing to do, but it was just him. I mean, it was just sort of natural and organic for him because he cared about people.
Yeah.
So why would he not be amongst them?
I think that trend. I think that people understood that. I think they always knew they could approach Kenny and weren't going to get a phony baloney answer. If Kenny could do something for you, he would do something for you.
Yeah,
so
that's very important.
Two points on that.
Yeah.
One is more than anybody else that we serve with, his ego was so under control.
Right.
I mean, he was not without ego. None of us are without ego. You can't do this job without some ego. But he never stole credit from anybody. He was more than happy to give credit away, to share it. Whatever worked to make us feel like we were his partners and he was ours, he would do. And again, this was just organic. It was just who he is or who he was. And the other thing was that really striking about him was that, you know, to your point about how authentic he was, he had his emotions on his sleeve at all times.
Right, exactly.
I mean, his eyes were expressive. You could tell when he was sad, when he was happy.
Yeah.
He wasn't pretending to be anything that he wasn't. And what he was incredibly wise and smart, as well as caring.
Well, I think that came from his years and years of public service, being a firefighter, and dealing with people on that level, and just transcended into his work with the PFFM. But I knew he loved being senator.
Yeah.
He loved representing this district.
Yeah. You know what else he did? He followed through, and like you said, Jim, if he couldn't do something, he would tell his constituents that, not
Right.
appear and make them feel
Right,
good and then
exactly.
walk away realizing he couldn't really solve their problem. He would tell them why. He would tell them, this is
Exactly.
what we can do, but this is what we can't. So he was honest, and in that he was trustworthy.
Right.
People knew it would be the straight story.
Right. He really stepped forward. I can just tell you a little bit of my story. I was a newly elected state representative, and unfortunately we had a tragedy in Woburn where a police officer was murdered on duty, or killed on duty, and by a career felon. And I'm just elected, and there's a lot of pressure on me to kind of do something. And Woburn is a city, but it's not really, Ken. And as you know, Jay, you represent it's a pretty small community when you really think about it.
Right.
And he was one of the first ones that stepped forward and raised his hand and said, you know, Jim, let's go out for a cup of coffee and decide what we're going to do. And it really took a heck of a lot of the pressure off of me to really do something affirmative. And as it turned out, with the help of, you know, with Jay and Ken, and the parole board was rearranged through Deval Patrick, the governor. And there was a lot of good things that came out of that. But Ken kind of took the lead and really made me feel a heck of a lot better, that I wasn't isolated, that I wasn't alone, there was somebody there to help us.
And he's doing, well, he was doing the same thing with Mary Cummings Park,
Right,
which is
exactly.
at the intersections of
Burlington.
communities here. His office, he and his office took the lead on that. We certainly helped, we did our parts, but Ken gets a lot of the credit when this thing works out, and it
Sure
will.
does.
He does. And another issue that affects both Woburn, Burlington directly are these noise barriers.
Right.
Ken took Deval Patrick in a car and drove him physically past 128 to look into the yards during the fall and winter months. And
Right.
look how close these folks are. You know, we're continuing to work.
Right.
You filed bills that I've co-sponsored
Right, exactly.
to try to get these noise barriers for people who have homes along that area. And he never stopped working on that.
Right,
And
exactly.
we'll continue on with that legacy.
Yeah.
And by the way, his predecessor in that office, Bob Havern, did the same thing, which is why there are sound barriers in parts of Lexington right now along Route 95. So we've got some good models of success to work with, and we will continue. We will carry on that fight.
We will.
And Kenny's just a testament of an all-around great guy, and first and foremost, he loved his family. He's got a wonderful wife, Judy.
Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful family, great grandchildren. He used to talk to me about his grandchildren all the time. I used to love some of the pictures he'd take up at his house in the White Mountains. And he always invited me to play golf, but I never got there because I was looking to get a couple of strokes here and there. But he was a true, well-rounded individual, and he took care of business first, and that was his family.
He did. You're right about that. There were times that he talked to me and he said that you've got to remember your
Right.
priority.
You betcha.
know, and at the end, you're going to look back and say, you know, I wish I had spent more time with my family, or you'll say, I'm glad I made sure to do
Right,
that.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
And that's important to all of us. Well, folks, thank you very much for coming to visit with us and talking about our colleague, Senator Ken Donnelly.
Well, I want to thank you for us for doing this for us, because
Ken, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
and Ken Donnelly was not only a wonderful colleague and a wonderful man, but he was probably my closest friend and ally in the building. I miss him terribly, and I know you do too.
I do
Jim,
too,
and I know
Jay.
you do too,
Yeah.
Ken. So thanks for this opportunity to honor him in
Thank
this way.
you. We'll replace the seat, but we won't replace Senator Donnelly. We
Amen.
never will.
No way. Thanks, Ken. I
Amen.
appreciate
Thank you
it.
very
It's
much.
awful nice.
Representative
Give us,
Kaufman.
Thanks for doing
give
this.
us an opportunity
Wyatt.
to talk about Ken. Thank you. Ken.
Thank you,
you.
everybody. We'll be back.
Thanks.
Representative Mark Lombardo from Billerica had a special relationship with Senator Ken Donnelly, and while he couldn't come to the studio to talk to us, he sent in this video. Take a look.
Hi, my name is Mark Lombardo. I'm the state representative from the town of Billerica, and I served with Ken Donnelly for a number of years up on Beacon Hill. We both represented the town of Billerica. And Ken was just a great man, a great partner, who was always there for Billerica, who was a good friend to me. I think some of our best times came at a lot of the charity fundraising events that we do in town and the golf tournaments. And we'd always play in the same team and always have a good time over some beers, some bad swings, and a lot of laughs out on the golf course. But I'll say this about Ken. It didn't matter that he was a Democrat and I was a Republican. He just wanted to do what was right for our communities, and he wasn't afraid to give other people credit when they got things done. He was just a good guy, and he's missed every day. and I'll forever remember our friendship and our time together on Beacon Hill.
But it's just a wonderful area, and that's why people choose to live here. You have your stone's throw from Boston, and with all the libraries and all the cultural experiences and the theaters and everything else. So yeah, it's really is a classic area and a classic place to be.
Yeah. All right, we're back now, and we're with Marge McDonald, the Director of the Council on Aging, and Chief Steve Yetman from the Burlington Fire Department. We're talking about our reflections on Ken Donnelly, our state senator who passed away in April. And I'll open up to either of you who wants to begin. Chief, you worked with Ken Donnelly as a firefighter.
I did.
Forest
I did. I started in Burlington in the late 70s, and with Proposition 2.5, we laid off a number of firefighters in Burlington. And Lexington is non-civil service. They gave their own exam, and actually they were hiring. So I actually got hired in Lexington in 1981. So I worked there 81 and 82, and I was actually assigned to Ken's shift. So I got to work with him for a while.
Talk to us about what was that like?
Well, Ken was just a firefighter at the time, but you know, it was great to work with. I worked with him on the ambulance and the engine, and you know, he was just a great guy to be around. And you know, you hear lately of all the things he's done, how he's championed all these causes, but that's the way he always was. You know, as a firefighter, that's what you do. You want to help people. So, you know, I've seen him as a young firefighter, because he started probably in the early 70s in Lexington, and I started in the late 70s. And then, you know, he became president of the Lexington Firefighters Union, became a legislative agent for the PFFM, Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts, and they eventually became secretary-treasurer. So I've seen him through his whole career. I've known Ken for 35 years.
What was your impression of working with him when he became our senator?
Good. You know, again, being out of the fire service, I mean, I saw him for so long in the fire service, and then we didn't have as much contact. But, you know, when he come to Burlington, you know, and then do the meetings with your people, he'd always make a point to come over and talk to us at the fire station. He always kept the contact, you know.
Was that the Ken Donnelly that you knew as a firefighter?
Absolutely, absolutely.
He really never changed, did he?
No, he never did.
He cares about people, and he showed it, right?
Absolutely.
Marge, he came to see the seniors at the COA every month. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot about that from him. Can you talk about your impressions of it?
It was funny because until Ken, I had never had regular visiting hours necessarily from one of our representatives or one of our senators. So when he called and said, when the office called and said that they wanted to set up regular office hours, I was like, okay. And I was thinking we would end up having, an aide come every month. Wasn't the case with Ken. He came himself every single month. And if he couldn't make it himself, he generally would cancel it if there was nothing going on, knowing that folks wanted to see him and not an aide. That wasn't what they were coming for. So he came religiously almost every single first Wednesday of the month. And he would have his kind of open office hours, and then he would sit with me for a little while, see what was going on, see if there was anything that I needed to advocate for, kind of tell me what was going on. And then he would go to the Indian lunch and have lunch with them. And he would eat lunch with them. He wouldn't just go in and say, hey. But we had a really great relationship. In the beginning, it was me kind of mentoring him about seniors, although he knew a lot because so many years on the fire service, he had spoken to a lot of seniors and helped a lot and heard a lot of the stories. But it didn't take long until he was teaching me. And he taught me a lot about how the State House works and what goes on up there. It was definitely a learning process.
When he did that, I bet it helped you as far as how to advocate best for the seniors that you work with.
It absolutely did. And he did a lot of hand-holding on it. He would come to me in January and he would say, okay, what are your priorities? What does MCOA want, Mass Councils on Aging? What do they want to see? What do you want to see as the senior priority? And there was always, when he gave his, excuse me, when he gave his 3 priorities to the speaker, one of them was always senior related. And it was kind of up to myself and the other directors to kind of decide what we wanted that priority to be.
Did he have that same relationship with the COA directors in the other towns he represented? What I'm asking, did you talk to each other?
We did. Some were closer than others. I'm not sure if I had the closest or not. I think I might have had the closest with him. Donna Popkin from Billerica, who's no longer a director, was also very close. And she's really tuned in and dialed into everything. So she was probably the strongest advocate. But we talked, we both made time to talk to each other every single month about what was going on.
Yeah, I ask you that because in the State House, those of us on the House of Representatives side who are in Ken's district, we all feel so comfortable with the access that we have to our senator, and all worked so well with him, each of us, in our own way. Chief, as far as the fire, the first responders, fire, police, did you have that same level of access?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, just being a firefighter and being a mentor at that level, and then Kenny actually, he did 37 years in Lexington Fire. So when he retired, he was a lieutenant, so he was that supervisory role and mentoring, young firefighters. And then on the union level, first at the local with Lexington firefighters, and then at the state level, he was just always there. I mean, he's always accessible.
I learned a lot, so much from working with Senator Donnelly. I talked about it in the first segment of our show. But Chief, talk about some of the things that you might have learned or picked up from working with Ken Donnelly over the years.
Just to be concerned for others. I mean, again, I was a young firefighter walking in the door, and it just, you learn from example, and that's how Kenny was. You really do. You just watch what he does, and it's like, wow, he gets it.
Yeah, I know coming in to talk to the seniors, sometimes there's many seniors who want to talk. Sometimes there aren't so many, or sometimes none. But Senator Donnelly still came each month and sometimes talked to you. Can you talk about, did that affect, did that ever discourage him, or did you know he was just going to keep coming?
No, he kept coming because he knew that even if there was no seniors there, he and I would sit down and talk, and I would be the voice for the seniors. I think that maybe a lot of them don't come because they know that I'm going to voice their concerns, so long as they voice them to me. And I was sort of that kind of go-between between the seniors and Ken. And so we would have, an hour quite often that we would just chat, and we would talk personal things, but we'd also really kind of delve into what was going on for seniors, not just on the local level, but the state level and the national level.
Sometimes we're going to some of the things you talked about, even on a personal level, he cared so much about his family that I bet when talking about concerns of the seniors in Burlington, he could relate for that reason as well, because he was such a caring person.
I think, and being in the fire service, I think that really, brought it to light, seeing people at their most vulnerable, that he could see what they needed. I'm sure he walked into hundreds of homes, somebody sitting on the floor, can't get up, they look in the fridge, there's no food, there's no heat in the house, and I'm sure there's hundreds, even in Lexington where he worked, there's still a lot of poverty there, so a lot of house rich and cash poor, so he really brought that with him into the State House.
Chief, I bet that perspective really does affect someone, especially him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you get that in general with first responders, police and firefighters, but, Kenny I think he set the bar.
Yeah, I think you're right. He worked hard on substance abuse and mental health issues and talked a lot about what he was trying to do. And when he saw that someone needed a voice, he was there for them.
Right.
With respect to the seniors, that was especially important to him. You mentioned that he would have lunch with the Indian community.
Yep.
That was one of the first communities he introduced me to. That was important to him. And I would imagine that before serving as senator, he didn't have a lot of involvement, but he learned, and there was that close connection between them.
He was always willing to learn. That was one of the things I think that set him apart is, he didn't come in thinking he knew everything. He came in knowing he didn't know very much, even though he really did know a lot. And I don't know if the fact that he wasn't a lawyer or wasn't a politician, if that had an effect on his working harder or not, but it definitely set him apart from everyone else up on the State House.
He was especially approachable when it came to the community, to us as colleagues, but people always were coming up to him and talking to him, telling him about their concerns. Did you see that in the community as well?
Oh, absolutely. Every time he came to Burlington, if he had the time, if he didn't have to be somewhere else, he'd always come in and interact.
Yeah. You know what else? I mean, he lived in Arlington, but you'd never know it. And walking around Burlington, he cared as much about Burlington as any other town in his community, especially including the town he lived in. It made no difference to him. Were there any memories that you have of any interactions between either yourself or any of the seniors or any of the other people in the community that you remember that kind of defined Ken Donnelly?
I think the last interaction, which it wasn't really an interaction. But one of his last acts as senator was to basically save the ride. He was literally days before his death, and the ride was really on the chopping block. They were talking about taking away all of the premier services, which is the same day service. So you could call up and say, I need to go to the doctor, or can you take me? And that would, actually in the end probably cost a lot more, because then you have folks like the chief having to go out and help people if they can't get to the doctors. And going from one town to another, evening and weekend. And so they wanted to do away with that. And Ken wrote a letter basically just saying, this is ridiculous. We can't, it's just not going to work. You need to keep this. We're preying on the people that need it the most and that are most vulnerable. And he got, I want to say it was 16 other senators basically to sign on to that letter, and we ended up saving the ride for this year. But at least, that was one, I don't know what was going on. I don't know if he was, how coherent he was, how well he was able to do that, but he managed. And, that was, I think, one of his last acts as senator. And I think, to me, that describes who he is, it kind of sums up his life and what he accomplished.
Yeah, he has so much concern for others, and maybe that helped keep him going, was he still had goals to work toward.
Right.
One of the things that I know he was so proud of was his cooking ability, and I know that as a firefighter he would cook in the stations. And can you talk a little bit about your memories of that?
Yeah, back, again, in most firehouses, you have a handful of good chefs, and Kenny was one of the good chefs. It was fun because it's a brotherhood. I mean, you're living together.
Yeah. I heard stories about nights where the firefighters were going to order out for something, and Ken would say, "Oh no, we're not ordering out. We're going to make this right here," and whatever he would make would be better than the restaurant could have delivered anyway. But it's a way of caring for each other, isn't it? I mean, cooking brings you together. Eating really brings you together, and these events that he came to, and like you said, he didn't send staff. He came because we're going to have some folks out from the Middlesex 3 Coalition, and the annual meeting is coming up tomorrow. Would have happened by the time many of you were watching out there, but he was there. And again, accessible and available, and so if anybody wanted to talk about, in this case it might have been a traffic concern, he's out there and willing to listen, available to listen.
He was very supportive, of the senior prom that we put on. He was very supportive when I was doing winning my half marathons. Right. You both did a St. Patty's Day dinner last year, which he was really supportive of.
That was fun.
He was just a great support. I mean, just right there for anything you asked of him.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a great example, because it wasn't just call my staff, work it out. We'll send a check or something like that. It was, what are we going to do? And how can we think of something, to make things even better? And the St. Patrick's Day, we had the kids from Shawsheen, that's right, come in and make that. We worked it out. We provided the material, the food, and they cooked and had a great time, and they had a great rewarding experience. And the seniors enjoyed it. And we had corned beef and cabbage.
But you said it too. That was him. How do we make it better? And that was the same in the fire service, at the union level, or as you know, at the state level. That's Ken. That's how he was.
Right.
How can we make this better?
Right. There are many people who will describe a problem, and Ken will describe solving the problem. He never stops at, well, this is why it's difficult. Of course it's difficult. A lot of things are difficult. And that's why we have people like Senator Donnelly there to solve those problems, because if it was easy, anybody could do it. Did you have, and I'm sure that in your conversations with him, when you brought difficult issues to him, if it pertained to supporting your firefighters or the seniors, you probably got that same attitude.
He was very good at giving me a different perspective on what the issues were and how to solve them. And probably half the time we'd go over it and I could go back and have it solved in 2 seconds flat, or he would take it on if it was a little more difficult, and it would be, I'd never hear of it again because he would solve the problem.
Right. Right. And I know he was honest. If there were some that really couldn't be solved because of a reason, he'd tell you why.
Yep.
Right.
But if there was any way to do it, he would think of, how are we going to do this? Sometimes he would talk to one of us, and we'd come up with a plan, and sometimes he just innately knew what to do. And got things done. Any other final thoughts?
it's funny, I miss him because right now we have a lot of things happening at the State House in the Senate, and a lot of amendments that need to be signed on to. And I keep getting these letters, and I'm like, oh, no, I don't have anyone to call. Oh, I don't have anyone to call. So I'm particularly missing him this week and last week because of that. But it's a huge loss, and I think I haven't seen him literally since October. He came in October. But my last really good conversation with him was in August, and I really miss those conversations we had. I miss those talks.
Yeah.
You know, it's just kind of, you almost take it for granted. You know, he was such a staple in my life that I just almost took for granted that I was going to see him every month until I didn't.
Mm-hmm. Chief?
Yeah, you know, it was he was a retired firefighter. He was out of the union, but I mean, he left the example of how to act and how to be. You know, I'm sure, you know, there isn't a void in the fire service per se or the union, but I'm sure there's a void at the state level.
There really is. And there's a void that you see here, you know, at the wake, at the funeral. The three of us were together talking about the loss that really will never be filled. There'll be other people, but there won't be Ken.
You know, it's helping people. People call up and have a problem. And I think that's it's one of the things that I don't think people understand, that they can pick up that phone and call up. No, we can't help everybody. We can't solve everyone's problems, but we sure as heck can get them an answer. And we can, you know, point them in the right direction. And there are times that we've really been able to help people that have had serious problems, and whether it's just recently going through, I had a woman that called, right, that she was going through the connector for health care. I'm not talking about free health care. She was going through the connector. She was paying for it. And her husband was scheduled to get a procedure at a local hospital. And it was going to cost her, she was going to have to come up with $6,000 that day, right, because of the problems they were having with the, you know, putting them online with the computer system for the Affordable Care Act. And this wasn't affordable. This, like I said, this was through the connector. This was purchasing insurance through the connector. And we were able to call up and just because she was at a dead end. She kept calling and getting transferred. But we were able to call, and we were insistent that we talk to someone and start, you know, getting the problem. And the next day, I know that the, you know, the health connector put out a notice that they were going to have something for legislators so that they could get more information. Well, I know that I was one of many of our legislators that just called with outrage to say, this has to be done. These people were at their wits' end. You know, they needed help, and we were able to do that. And that's, I think, that when you talk about, you know, we have those opportunities to help people every once in a while, and when they're kind of like up against it and they don't know where to turn, just call. You call our office, and we try. Now, I'm not saying we can do it for everybody, but I can tell you one thing, we will make the commitment to try.
And we're back. We're talking with Sonia Rollins, the director of the Burlington Chamber of Commerce, one of the directors, and one of the directors of the Middlesex 3 Coalition, which brings together the communities along Route 3 north from Burlington up to the New Hampshire border, Bob Buckley. And we've been talking about our reflections of Senator Ken Donnelly, who we lost way too soon earlier in April of this year. Can you share, we're going to talk in this panel about Ken's impact with the economic development of Burlington, what he did for our business community and essentially its residents through that. In no particular order, let's talk about what you'll remember most about working with Senator Donnelly.
So thank you, Bob. I think, you know, when I think of Senator Donnelly, I think of a number of things, but the thing that strikes me most about him is that there was always a human element. So even though we're here to talk about the business side of it, Senator Donnelly knew how to take the business component, what was important to make business and economic development vibrant in this area, but still attach the human element, what that meant to the taxpayers who were doing business in the area, what that meant to the residents in the area, and he brought it all together. There was, in my mind, always a two-prong approach with him. He always saw what it meant on the business aspect, but he never lost sight of what that meant personally, whether it was moving something forward because he knew it would be for the betterment of the community or for the betterment of people through the businesses that were being brought to them. it's so crystal clear for me that when you see him, and when you would see him, you would hear it in his voice. It wasn't really just, it wasn't a blanket statement he was making. He always applied it. He knew what he was talking about. He looked you in the eye. He understood what he was saying. You know, I've worked with him, and Bob has worked with him on a number of different things, but it just always struck me that he cared. You know, he cared about what was going forward. And for me, you know, we talk about different things in Burlington with the town center, for example. When we were talking about the town center and the state and being involved with local transportation and what that meant for Cambridge Street, Senator Donnelly was always there to discuss how he could help, how he could move it forward. I'm sad to say he's not here. He won't see its fruition completely,
Right.
but his hands were in that pot always, you know, and always wanting to do something for it.
Yeah, I would echo that, Sonia. He had that uncanny ability to take a complicated issue, which a lot of the issues are complicated, and see the overall picture. But he also, as you indicated, brought that human element into it, and had that ability to say that, while in concept it works well, but how are we going to handle his constituents and their issues? And he just didn't escape it by saying that. He said, now that we understand it, let's figure out how we're going to do that.
Right.
And he had the ability to say, now that we've identified the issues, let's work together to make those issues resolvable. And he always came to the table not with an agenda that was one item, do or die, that this was the item he was going to fall on a sword for. He had the overall concept of what's good for the region and what's good for all of my constituents. And those could be the individuals, the voters, as well as the business community, because it's not us or them, it's interrelated. And I used to always say, although I've probably worn out the phrase, if you don't think it's all about creating jobs, try unemployment for 6 months and then come back to talk to me.
Well, yeah, well, you know, it's interesting that you raised the issue, because Ken Donnelly was a leader of the labor movement within the firefighters, the PFFM, and one might think, and in the same way that I've represented employees in employment disputes for a career, one might think that Ken would be coming in saying, well, he's going to fight for one side of an equation and you know, be focused on just that. But when he came in, he realizes, and he works with you on the economic development side, he realizes that, you know, what's best is when the tide rises and all ships float higher. So if we can create jobs, then people will have places to work. And we partnered together on many bills that dealt with workplace training, 2 or 3 times. There's some coming up for hearing next week. That was the priority. And I was able to really relate to Ken, because we're working for working families. We are. But sometimes the best way to do that is to make sure there are opportunities for them.
And the only time I ever saw him upset, really upset, he called me up because he had heard that someone had said something that was very narrow and self-centered in terms of it was advancing their agenda versus the agenda of the overall concept of working together. When I say working together, all the communities to solve big issues. And he said, if we start doing this, we're going to go off track. And we go off track, people are going to say this was another initiative that is going nowhere because everyone's focused on their individual agendas. And he was legitimately upset. And I said, it's refreshing to see that someone felt that passionate about it. And you know, sometimes we're lucky. We had a period in time where we had some good leaders coming together at that moment in time when we were starting to do some macro planning, yourself included.
Thank you.
Yes, I always refer to you as the Ken Squared.
Right.
You know, I don't mean that. I don't mean that in a.
We might
in a
not have been
60
square,
Right.
but it was
I
great
mean,
to be
there were two of you,
referred to
right.
that
two
way.
of you, and the ability to work together to solve transportation, to look at workforce training, issues that are not going to be solved in 3 weeks, 3 years, or maybe 10 years. But if you don't begin the process, you'll never get there. And Ken always had that optimism that if we all work together, and as I tell you all the time, he didn't agree with everything, and he let you understand why he didn't agree. And when you sit down and turn down the volume and have a discussion of the issues, you'd be surprised what can come out. And hopefully, as a tribute to him, that we can continue this process and remember his approach when we hit those bumps in the road.
Absolutely. You know, I think he also, the thing that strikes me, and not alone, but certainly
Right.
Ken was one of them that understood the value of the partnership, the value of the private-public
Right.
partnership, knowing that it's important to move a community or to move an area forward in a business sense. You also have to, the partnership has to be both on the state side,
Right.
on the local side, and then, you know, within the business itself. So he never saw one side as more important than the other because he knew the value of keeping all of that going. Because if one side falters, really, in essence, it's a domino effect.
That's right.
And
We're as
he knew
strong.
that.
Yeah, we're as strong as our weakest link.
Yeah.
And going back to we were talking about even with the Middlesex 3 Coalition, he believed in that mission.
Yes.
Middlesex 3 encompassed 3 of his communities, or maybe more by now: Lexington, Burlington, Woburn, or his community. Billerica 4, with me, with 2, Burlington and Bedford. And when we can improve the employment opportunities in one town, we're improving we're bringing business into another. We're affecting housing in another,
Right.
and everybody wins.
Right.
And I know that Ken and I both saw that as an opportunity to grow, rather than saying, okay, what's in it for my district, as opposed to
Right.
someone else's district.
That's
Right.
right.
We both saw that, we all help each other out, and we're all better off now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And he helped create that critical mass that, between the Senate and the House and the governor, we had a force to be reckoned with, and we were able to set an agenda, focus that agenda. And as I said, he always had that twinkle in his eye when he tried to explain to you, well, you may want to consider
Right.
this approach, because trust me, this might be a better way of getting it, where you want to be. And we benefit from that. The whole region benefits from it. Implementing a shuttle, workforce training with the fine universities we have in this area. And his fingerprints were on it,
Yeah.
but he wasn't always out front taking the bow.
Right.
And that's
right.
important also.
That's right.
Right.
He was a problem solver.
That's right.
And it's common in government to have people that can sound like they empathize with someone's problems, and they repeat their problems. And someone says, well, they understand where I'm coming from. Well, but that's not enough, because
Right.
Ken then would take that and say, well, let's work toward a solution.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he wasn't essentially using the problem in order to become popular.
Right.
He was creating the solution, if at all possible.
I think he was the perfect definition of a public servant.
Right.
Right.
You know, when you think about people saying they're in public service, he from what he did as a career to what he then transformed into his political career, he was that exact description of a public servant.
Right.
Because public servants don't worry about if they're necessarily getting the fame for it,
Right.
right? They're more worried about is it moving it forward, and I think he did that beautifully, actually.
And he was very adept at when he was talking to you. And it's a skill. When he was talking to you, he made you believe that your issue, your approach, that conversation was the most important conversation in the room. He wasn't looking around to say, okay, how can I get out of this conversation because I want to be over here.
Right.
And that's a skill that make people feel when they walk away, he listened.
That's
You know,
right.
he appreciated the opportunity to help,
Right.
and we knew that.
Yeah.
People who approached him for help, I think, realized that. He was glad to be in that position and was going to use that position in order to do that.
Yeah. The thing that strikes me too is that sometimes you don't, not us, because maybe we were fortunate enough to work with him, but sometimes you don't realize a void until the void is there.
I was
So,
gonna- yeah.
you know, so you are, you said it a little earlier, Ken, but you know, unfortunately he left us too soon, and the problem is you don't notice how great, we knew how great he was because we worked on projects with him or had seen him doing different things, but sometimes you don't see that void until it's gone, you know, and it's really nice that, A, you're doing this to remember that. I hope people will continue his work. I think Middlesex 3 will move his work forward. The Chamber believes in his work, will move it forward, and hopefully those who follow him will continue to do that as well.
But he left us with a responsibility.
Yes.
He left us with the responsibility that if you really say all these nice things about me, don't forget me. Don't forget what I was trying to achieve in your universe.
Right.
You know, he did a lot of other things, but in our universe, he was trying to push us towards an objective. So if you really want to honor me, it's nice for us to sit down and talk about him, but go out and do it, because that will be the best honor. I think it was Andrew Carnegie who wrote in something once that with success or power comes the responsibility to make sure that that responsibility goes to those who are less fortunate. So while he may not be with us, his force of character is telling us, if you really don't want to sound hollow, go and do what I started.
Right.
And you know what? You honored his memory just recently. The Middlesex 3, is it Middlesex 3 or the Chamber of Commerce that presents the honored and
Middlesex
cherished, Middlesex 3,
3,
right?
yeah.
The cherished Bubba Stick, which is that you created an honor
Right.
within Middlesex 3, where you have a stick called a Bubba Stick, a walking stick that people can use to lead a group.
Not
for
only a
leadership.
walking stick, a great walking
A
stick.
great walking
Made
stick.
by Texans.
By real Texans.
Real Texans,
That's
right.
right, that's right. And I know you were looking for
I
an
wish I had brought one. A
Yeah.
Bubba stick is made out of hickory. It actually is burnt into it. It says Bubba stick. Hickory being a strong hardwood. And on the top, if you're familiar with the Clydesdales, the Budweiser horses, the harness has these brass, I forget what you call them, but that tops the Bubba stick. So it is a strong staff
Well,
for
well,
leaders to lead us. But the thing that cracks me up is that at the bottom is a little note that says, this is made in Texas by real Texans.
Well, we actually have an opportunity to see that Bubba Stick.
Right.
Because we had a film crew out at the Council on Aging a few weeks ago when we presented the stick, although it was posthumously, in memory of Ken Donnelly, to his staff and his family. And let's take a look at that right now.
Let me tell you a little bit about this award. About 5-6 years ago, the governor at the time came to us, a group of us, and said, there are a number of big issues out there. Traffic, how do you move people to and from? Jobs, how do you keep people employed? Education, how do you educate people so that they can fill those jobs? And now one of my pet topics, medical care and health care. So we came up with this idea that we were going to form this entity that consists of business leaders as well as the communities that bound Route 3. Therefore, that's our name, Middlesex 3, from Lexington to the New Hampshire border. And we're grappling with those major issues. And I know that in the audience we have Paul Raymond, who sits on your planning board. He sees us, he's been to our meetings. We're trying to make a difference. And we work hard at it. You might not think so, based upon how I opened that, that piece of paper there. But we work very hard at trying to make a difference. And from day one, we had what we referred to as K squared. We had Ken Donnelly and Ken Gordon. And they both added guidance and their support, their wisdom to what we were trying to do. And I think we are making a difference. We have a long way to go. But as I tell people, if you don't take the first step, you will never, never get there. So we're working hard. So I believe that when people work hard, they should be recognized. And one of the ways we recognize a leader is you give them a proclamation. And one way I do it is I give them a guidance stick. This is what is referred to as a Bubba stick. And in order to earn a Bubba stick, you have to do something great.
So thank you for doing that.
So that goes to what we were saying earlier, that every time we look at that Bubba stick now, if you happen to have one, or the order of the stick, the Bubba stick,
Right.
that is a responsibility that us that are aspiring to achieve that should continue the memory of Ken, because our comments are hollow unless we follow through.
Absolutely.
You know,
It's
that's
true. And that we realize that we're working toward a goal, and sometimes things don't happen overnight.
Right.
But as you said, they're still worthwhile. And every, there are a lot of cliches. Every journey starts with a step and all of that. But we can get there, and we've made progress. And in the last 9 years, since Ken Donnelly has been our senator, and since I've been able to be part of it, we've gotten places.
Absolutely.
And it's because of the work that that Ken has done, or that we've done in partnership with the Chamber, with Middlesex 3, with the town, all together. And we've all had our positions to play in that role, in that game. And as you say, to honor his memory, we've got to continue to move forward.
That's true. That's true.
Any last impressions you want to leave with our viewers?
The twinkle in his eyes when he tried to explain to you that you may want to consider it from another perspective.
Yeah.
In other words, you don't know what you're talking about, but let me help you out here.
Sometimes he'd say, well.
Yeah, there was a pause. That
There's
meant
a
he was
pause.
thinking how to nicely tell you no.
But you know what? You can get away with that if you turn down the volume and you talk to each other. And sometimes you get so focused on your path because either we've done it before or we think our way is the right way. And then that light goes on in the back of the recess of that cavity up here that says, you know what, that's a great way of looking at it.
Absolutely.
And he had the ability of getting you there without making you feel that he got you there.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
truth.
absolutely right.
Right, you know, so.
That's the truth.
So,
No.
Sonia?
no, he was a
Oh,
wonderful
sorry.
man, and his memory hopefully will live on. And you know, the challenge is to you. I mean, Ken squared. We're down to Ken.
Down to one Ken.
Right. So the responsibility is probably a lot greater on you than it is on me or Sonia, because you're going to have to continue that legacy.
Well, I learned a lot from him,
Yeah.
and I'm prepared to move forward with that and a better representative for having worked with Ken.
You know, that's a great statement. You know what? When we're all finished with our careers, if people can make that statement that you're a better person because you dealt with this person, I don't think there's a better memory.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
so
Good point.
Absolutely.
Sonia?
I think I think we've said it. But to me, when I think of Ken Donnelly, like I said, I see a man who his heart and soul was into it. And I think anybody who's been in a room and trying to work on something collectively, it moves forward when your heart and soul is into it. And that really described him perfectly.
Right.
He did not engage. You know, he may have had to have engaged in some things that maybe weren't his top priority, but like you said, when he walked into the room, once he was there and engaged, it became his top priority of the day. And that's something that that not everybody carries.
Right.
So those of us that got the chance to work with him really feel honored by that. And those who are going to be touched by work he's done sometimes won't know that it was an honor to have that
Right.
from him.
Right.
But you know, his legacy will continue in that.
You know, as it turns out, we've had a few panels throughout the day. We're going to conclude our show soon with your panel, and I think it's fitting because you really did. You've hit the nail on the head as far as going forward. The loss of Senator Ken Donnelly is a significant loss. It's significant for his family. It's significant for our community, for Burlington, for the business community and the residents. But the challenge is there to build on what he gave us and to continue to work toward our future, to make Burlington a better place in the way that he envisioned and that we work toward together. the way that
Absolutely.
And
we all
knowing
work.
Ken, that's the way he'd want it.
Right.
That he'd say,
Absolutely.
look, you know, that's all wonderful that people say all the nice things, but just go out and do it for me.
You know, I'll tell you something interesting. We've all lost people we love in our lives, whether we've worked with them, whether they're family. I hope his family really feels that. I hope when they go through different areas that he worked on and they see it, just like when we go through things and we see something that reminds us
Right.
of him, I hope they feel that sense of pride that carries them forward.
It's a much better place because of it.
Right, they should be
Absolutely.
tremendously proud.
Absolutely.
Sonia and Bob, thank you for joining us on
Thank
Rappin'
you.
with the Rep. I'm State
It was an
Representative.
honor to be able to share some comments about Ken.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon. Folks, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Rappin' with the Rep. Called.
So if you can do good things for people, that's fun.
Yeah.